Hey, welcome. So let's talk about a subject that, let's be honest, a lot of us found a little boring in school: history. But what if I told you history isn't just a pile of names and dates to memorize? What if it's actually this incredible collection of stories that explains pretty much everything about how we got here? Let's dive in.
I bet this sounds familiar, right? This idea that history is just one long, dull list of dates you have to cram before a test. But I think that's only because we're often taught to look at it all wrong. We get so hung up on the when that we totally miss the why and the how, which is where all the good stuff, all the amazing stories are hiding.
So let's kick things off with our first big idea. What actually makes a date important? Is it the number itself, or is it something else entirely?
Think about it like this: your own birthday.
Is the specific day and month what really matters?
No, of course not. What matters is the event it represents, the day you were born. Historical dates are exactly the same. They're not just random numbers. They're like bookmarks for these epic stories of struggle, invention, revolution, all the things that literally shaped our world.
Take August 15th. As just a number on a calendar, it means nothing. But once you attach it to the event of Indian independence, wow, suddenly it's bursting with this incredible story of struggle, of sacrifice, of a nation's freedom being born. You see? It's the event that gives the date all of its power. Okay, so if we agree that the events are what really matter, that leads to a really interesting question. Who gets to decide which events are important enough to be remembered in the first place? Probably not, right? And this question, man, it gets to the absolute heart of a huge concept: perspective. History isn't some single, solid fact. It's a story, a narrative. And depending on who's telling that story, the whole thing can change. What gets put in the spotlight and what gets left in the dark.
And you can see that conflict of perspective so clearly here. A British historian from that colonial era, they might focus on the decisions of their governor-generals, painting them as these figures who brought order and progress. But an Indian historian would tell a completely different story, focusing on the revolutionaries who fought against that foreign rule. One story is about civilizing a nation. The other is about economic exploitation and the fight for freedom. It's the same timeline, but they are two completely different worlds.
Okay, so with all these different events, all these different perspectives, it sounds like a total mess, right? How in the world do historians even begin to organize it all without just making a giant list of thousands of dates?
You know, it's funny, we do this in our own lives all the time without even thinking about it. When your grandpa says, "back in my day," he's not giving you a specific year. He's talking about a whole era, a whole period of time defined by shared experiences. And you instantly know what he means. Well, historians have a formal tool for this, and it's called periodization.
So let's look at a really famous and honestly pretty controversial example. Back in the 1800s, this Scottish economist, James Mill, he split Indian history into three big chunks: Hindu, Muslim, and British. The whole thing was based only on the religion of the rulers at the time. He was basically saying that's the only thing that mattered in each of those eras.
Yeah, as you can probably guess, later historians, especially those from India, looked at this and said, no way. You can't just define a massive, complex civilization by the religion of its leaders. That's way too simple. So they came up with a new model, one based on huge societal shifts. They broke history into ancient, medieval, and, this is the really key part, they renamed that British period to something much more accurate: colonial. And that brings us to that really, really important word. What does colonial actually mean? Because it's a lot more than just having rulers from another country.
At its absolute core, colonialism is about one thing: subjugation. It's when one country doesn't just conquer another, it takes it over completely. It fundamentally changes everything: the politics, the economy, the society, even the culture, all to benefit the colonizer. It's a total reshaping of a society from the top down. In this process, it wasn't usually some sudden invasion. It was more like a slow burn. If you look at the British in India, they first showed up just as traders. But over time, they got really good at playing local kings against each other. Then they started imposing their own laws, their own taxes, and began to systematically drain the country's wealth. It was this gradual takeover that, in the end, changed every single part of Indian life.
Okay, but wait a minute. How do we even know all these details about stuff that happened hundreds of years ago? It's not like we can just ask someone who was there. So where does all this evidence come from?
Well, funny enough, a huge chunk of it comes from the British themselves. Their administration was, let's just say they were obsessed with paperwork. They wrote everything down, every policy, every decision, every memo.
They conducted detailed surveys and a census every 10 years. This created this massive paper trail that gives historians a really detailed, though very one-sided, window into how they ran the show.
But this leads us to what might be the single most important question a historian can ever ask. If all these records are official, written by the people in charge, whose voices are we not hearing? Who is getting left out of the story?
And this is the great challenge for any historian. Official records are fantastic for showing us the perspective of the administrators, their plans, their reasons, their goals, but what they almost never tell us is what it actually felt like to be a farmer facing a brand new tax, or a tribal community being pushed off their land. We get the official plan, but we totally miss the human impact on the ground.
And this is why a good historian has to be a detective. They can't just rely on the official version of events. They have to go out and hunt for other clues. They dig through personal diaries, autobiographies, old newspapers, even folk songs and local stories, all to try and piece together a much more complete, much more human picture of the past. So all of this leaves us with a final and pretty fascinating question. If history is always a collection of stories told from all these different viewpoints, is it even possible to find one single objective truth about what happened? Or is the real truth found not in trying to pick one story, but in the effort to understand them all? Definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me on this one.